we need to do ourselves that favor and be able to recognize that while the wound, whatever it is in your life, may not be your fault, likely isn't your fault, whatever the case may be, we always have a choice in how we heal.
You don't have to carry the burden of all your anxiety, depression, whatever mental health challenge you have. Find someone to talk to, seek out a therapist, find community. We talk so much about the importance of that on the show, but it doesn't have to be a solo activity. Welcome to the Living Richly podcast. Today we're talking about women's mental health. And this is an exciting episode for us because it's part of our series, Real Women, Real Talk. And Wendy and I are delving into some pretty important conversations that we feel we're not having enough of. And so these are open and raw, and we're excited that you're joining us today.
I love it. This is going to be a great episode. And some of the comments that we receive on the series that we've been doing, the Real Women, Real Talk, have kind of morphed into conversations around mental health. So we thought this would be a perfect topic to dive into.
Yeah. And I think you and I, so far, we've been pretty open and raw about our own personal journey.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. It's easy when we're sitting across from each other. Sometimes we forget. I'm just kidding. So on this topic, I'm wondering, why don't we start with a moment where you realize sort of like mental health isn't this sort of concept, right? That's out there. It's something personal for you.
Yeah, I think right away when I think about just exactly what you asked, I think about my time when I was working in the HR space. So a lot of my work prior to what I'm doing right now was dealing with employees. Working with the business, but working with employees on the labor relations side, but a big component of it in workplace accommodations, just being able to support employees where they were at. And working in the HR space, dealing with employees and literally having people sit across from me and share all of the struggles that they were going through to then be able to try to do their job, but also dealing with my own mental health journey, which I talked about in my episode a while back. Yeah. And really recognizing that there wasn't enough resources. And I distinctly remember one employee sitting across from me talking about very deep suicidal thought. Oh, wow. And my first thought was, I can't even help myself. Mm-hmm. How on earth am I going to be able to help this person? Wow. I'm not equipped to be able to deal with this. Right. And we don't have enough resources. And really sitting behind my desk and just feeling so helpless and not knowing, gosh, how am I going to be able to care for myself? And this is where so it was part of how I recognized that I just needed to prioritize my self-care so much, really be able to, and part of it was like, is this it for me? Like, where do I go from here? But to really take it into my own hands, to be a role model for my kids, and be able to go public and share my journey.
That's amazing. For me, I think I remember the moment I officially got diagnosed with anxiety, and it was like this, almost like a moment of relief where it was like, oh, well, that explains my entire life up until this moment. And that was like in my 30s. Right. And so I was always called like a shy kid. I was called anxious at times, but never formally diagnosed, right? Like it didn't exist back then. It was like, buck up, do what you can. Yep. And there's such a difference between being called anxious and having anxiety. Mm-hmm. And I think oftentimes those terms get like interchanged so often, and they're different, because feeling anxious is a temporary state, right? Yes. It's like, it's actually there to protect you, right? Yep. So that's
which isn't always a bad thing either.
No, not at all. But having anxiety is all of the time. It is like this chronic state. And if I can give an example, the best example that I have is for me. Let's say I'm late for a meeting with my boss. Yeah. Okay. If you're feeling anxious, you're anxious about being late and you're like, oh, this isn't great. You don't feel good. It's temporary. Right? Person with anxiety, it's like the second that meeting is booked, you're already thinking about, well, what's this meeting about? And why am I having this meeting? And what's going to happen in this meeting?
Yep.
The night before the meeting, you're making sure lunches are packed and kids are ready to go. You picked out your outfit. You're already like, what if my boss says this? Are they going to fight? Like your head is already like spinning out of control. Right. Yep. And then in the morning, you're like running late and you're like, why did I curl my hair? I don't have time for this. Or like one of the kids can't find their shoes. And you're like, why didn't I plan better? And the self like negative talk takes over. And then it's like you drop your kid off and then you're rushing them. And you're like, what if that's the last time I see my kid and the school blows up? And then I'm a horrible mom. And then you're driving to work and you're like, I go route A, route B, and you pick route B, and route B's stop and go traffic, and you're like, oh, you're an idiot. Why'd you pick that path? Like anxiety is
a whole process of emotion that,
it never stops and it never quiets, right? When it's really firing. And I think it's an important distinction to make between anxiety and feeling anxious. So for me, when I was diagnosed, I was like, oh, that's what all this like jibber jabber has been in my head for years.
Yeah. And I love that there's more, because when we were growing up, to your point, it was just you deal with it, or you were labeled as the kid with problems and put in the problem kid classroom, right?
Yeah.
You're on Ritalin or you're on, whatever other type of drug.
Yeah.
That means that you're a special case, and they were very much classified. I think there's still some classification that goes on, but I think that there's more awareness happening around anxiety as a disorder.
Yes.
Compared to somebody being anxious. So I love that you made that distinction around that.
Yeah. And I think for women, it shows up in different ways, right? Like we have specific pressures that show up in society. So I know for me, feeling the pressure of always having to be like the comparison game, like feeling, you look at Sarah's Facebook page. I don't know Sarah. Sarah's not real. But
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. I look at Sarah's social media and I'm like, oh, she got it all together and her kids are perfect and she's lost all the body weight and she or her baby weight and, she's cutting her kids' sandwiches into like funky shapes and they're all being healthy. And like, and everyone's so happy in their family photos. And it's like
a tampon commercial. Everybody's happy.
It's like, because that's how it really is. And so I know like that pressure for a lot of women, that comparison game that social media often plays, causes a lot of an anxiety and depression for women. We're supposed to have it all together, like all of the time.
Yeah. And I don't think it matters at what age you are. And I just hearing you talk about that reminds me of a quote that I sometimes see. And it's a quote that almost gives people permission that it's okay to go back to school when you're 40. It's okay to get married when you're in your 40s.
Yes.
It's okay to not have your life figured out when you're 20, because I think that social pressure of, oh my gosh, I need to graduate school and I've got to get a good job. And, this person has a great job and I'm not done yet. And then this person is getting married. I still haven't found my life partner. And so I think that the social pressures around that is a very real thing. And social media certainly doesn't help with that. I think for me, and I'm not chuckling because it's funny. We've done a whole episode on this around body image and body dysmorphia. And I think women face intense pressure to be able to conform to those narrow standards of beauty that we see, which absolutely can lead to body dissatisfaction, eating disorders, low self-esteem, all of that stuff, which can then trigger anxiety and just all of those really poor self-worth feelings that go on in your mind. And we're bombarded all the time. Like we live in an instant gratification society. I mean, you order something on Amazon, it comes the next day. It's, it's very hard for our brains to be able to turn off. So that constant bombardment of unrealistic, beauty, body image just splashed everywhere can really, really wreak havoc on feelings of inadequacy, and self-worth, and also the standards on how we should age, like what that looks like. So, I think that's a big pressure for women.
Yeah, I agree. And we did a really powerful episode on body image. And I think it's outside of just the physical too. It's the mental load that women hold
yes,
to keep it all together, to hold, you're supposed to, it's a strong word, but the pressure is there to feel like you have to show up as a perfect wife, the perfect daughter, the perfect mother, the perfect boss, if that's what you are, the employee, perfect friend. Like everything is just supposed to be perfect. And the mental load, I was out for dinner with my girlfriends last night. We were talking about it, like the mental load that women carry in marriages, relationships with kids is intense. We feel things different than men do, and that's okay, right? We have an intensity about, like, when my kid is 5 minutes late, I am picturing you dead on the side of the highway. Like I am literally in panic mode about where my kid is. And I can watch, I can watch Eric, right? And he's just not worried the same. And it doesn't mean he doesn't worry about his kids. It's just, I can't explain it. It's like this guttural. So you have all of that anxiety, right? Going on, all of that like fear a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So what are some like coping mechanisms? Like what has worked for you in sort of squashing that a little bit? Or how can we maybe give some of our listeners some ways that have worked?
Yeah. So in terms of being able to learn how to keep it all together, navigate our expectations, we can often refer this to like emotional labor.
Yeah.
In terms of everything that we carry. And, to your point, our expectation of being caregivers, nurturers in every aspect, learning to recognize that that's draining and overwhelming, and also recognizing that leads to burnout.
Yeah.
And for most women, being overachievers or high performers, except us.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know what you're talking about. We have an innate need to feel the ability to prioritize everyone else's needs before us. So, which then in turn means that we're neglecting ourselves. So it's very easy for us to talk about set boundaries, ask for help, learn to be okay with good enough versus the best. But in all reality, that's a fact. And it's a practiced habit to be able to learn how to ask for help, to be okay with it not showing a sign of weakness. And it's a practice habit to set boundaries.
Yeah.
And for anyone that really struggles with boundaries, which is a lot of women.
Agreed.
I'd really encourage people to go back and listen to the episode that we did on setting boundaries. It was probably one of our top episodes because there was a lot of great tips in there around that. But there's no easy way around, or some magical solution on do this and do this. It really is a practiced art of these are the things, these are the steps that you need to do. And maybe that means sitting down every Sunday night, going through what your schedule is, figuring out what is urgent, what's a priority, what would be nice to have done, but doesn't have to be done. Who can you ask for help, and learning to kind of let go of the need to be able to do everything on your own. Yes. Again, it's, there's probably people listening that are like, yeah, that's so easy to say. It's not easy, but we've walked that journey in terms of being able to kind of really recognize I'm okay with good enough for whatever situation it is. Yeah. It doesn't have to be the best. And for me, being a overperformer and a high achiever, that's a big step.
Yeah.
Where I feel like I'm making progress and learning how to deal with that emotional labor and start to let that go.
Yeah. And I think saying no, like it's, we talk about boundaries, but saying no, like we often commit to doing things as women, as people pleasers, right? We want to help everyone else, and we want to go to like Sarah Lou. I don't know, I'm picking on Sarah today, but Sarah Lou's birthday party. We want to be there, right? But we've got all this other stuff going on. And so we'll prioritize other people often over ourselves, and taking care of our own sort of mental health and taking care of ourselves, right? Like just generally making time for ourselves. Like last night we went out for dinner, and then a few of the girls are like, let's go grab a drink after. And I'm like, no, I'm recording tomorrow. I have the podcast. I'm like, I have a lot. And they're like, you're not coming? I'm like, no. Everyone's face was like, what? Because I always go. And I'm like, no, like the last thing I want to do is be tired today. Yeah. I want to have a meet. And that's me taking my mental care back, right? Because I need 8 hours of sleep. I know that, or I'm not going to be good today.
Yeah.
And so that's me trying to take that time. But saying no when you've got like amazing people who I actually really want to spend time with. But I also know that if I don't go home and get ready and go to bed on time, I'm not going to be ready for today. And that's just me knowing now how much I value my sleep. And that's part of my mental health self-care.
Yes. And I will say, just a sidebar on that, having the right group of people around you that aren't going to make you feel guilty for saying no.
Not at all.
Because there are definitely people that are in circles of relationships or friendships where they feel so innately guilty for saying no because of that feeling of guilt that is put on them. So having the right, if you're around people that are making you feel like shit because you need to get more sleep or you have then that might not be the right circle to be able to help support you in that emotional journey.
Totally.
Yeah.
For women, I'm curious to know if there's an area you feel for women's mental health that we don't maybe talk enough about, or doesn't maybe get as much attention, or maybe things that women talk about or don't, for that matter.
Yeah, I think so. Off the top of my head, and we haven't touched on this topic. We've talked about kind of sidebars of the comment, but I think reproductive health trauma, and what I mean by that is women who have experienced trauma due to reproductive health issues.
Yeah.
Miscarriages, infertility, pregnancy loss, all of those things that can be just such a huge emotional journey for women, and where they can feel very isolated and very alone, and they have such a profound impact on mental health.
Yeah.
But I don't think, in my personal opinion, that they're given adequate attention or support. Now, of course, there's support groups and that kind of stuff, but I feel like from a mental health perspective, are we really doing a good job at talking about the stigma of mental health around that particular topic?
Yeah, I think all around that topic, from deciding that you want to have a child, trying to conceive, the pressure is on women.
Yeah.
We carry children, babies, that's our role. And when you can't get pregnant, right, or you can't fulfill or hold a pregnancy, that the mental load of that alone, we're not even pregnant yet. We're not even, there's no trauma around pregnancy yet, but just trying to even get pregnant.
Yeah.
I know so many women that have gone through infertility and tried everything, and that load that women carry it's their fault. Right. So if something happens, and I'm very open to talk about this, I miscarried my first pregnancy.
So did I.
And that mental load is, oh, I shouldn't have lifted the groceries.
Yes.
Oh, I shouldn't have, I was working out. I shouldn't have been working out. That voice in your head is you messed up. You did something wrong.
This is your fault.
This is your fault. Yeah. And that is, a miscarriage is so devastating, and women don't talk about it. And I know so many women that have miscarriages. When I miscarried, they're like, oh yeah, I miscarried. I'm like,
yeah, it's almost as casual as just asking how the weather is.
Yeah. It blew my mind.
Yeah.
I remember just being like, oh, really? You've never, I get it. It's not a topic you bring up, you're having a drink. It doesn't just come up, but to know so many women go through it, and we don't talk about that loss.
Yep. It's almost like it almost just becomes like a fact of life.
Yeah.
Well, if you get pregnant, well, you might carry the baby to term, you might not. And that's it.
Right.
And there's no okay, so I guess I'll just wait and see. But then you're kind of sitting on the edge of, right, especially if you've had a miscarriage, and then when you get pregnant again, with my first daughter. So I had a miscarriage. My first daughter, when I was pregnant with her, I had a terrible pregnancy scare, and I won't get into all the details around it, but I ended up having to have an amniocentesis when I was 20 weeks.
Scary.
And very high chance and probability that she was going to have trisomy 21 or Downs.
Okay.
So through the whole pregnancy,
Sure.
I was just a complete mess.
Yeah.
And, by the grace of God, she was born healthy. We'd already decided regardless, we were keeping the baby, but just that feeling of just continuous stress and anxiety on making sure like, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. And then becoming pregnant with my second daughter, same thing. And I talked about this in another episode of having prepartum depression.
Yes.
And I think part of that was linked to all of the trauma from what I had experienced.
Well, how could it not? I remember when I got pregnant, the second time. So after miscarrying, I got pregnant very quickly, which often happens too, just because your hormones are raging at that point. Yeah. So within 3 months after miscarrying, I was pregnant again, and I was absolutely terrified.
Oh, I can imagine.
I was like, the same thing's going to happen. I was, what if, right? And so I would constantly, like, if the baby didn't move after you get to a certain point, the baby's not moving. I'm like, why is the baby not moving? I had recently just had a girlfriend who had a stillborn baby, like full term. And so I was nervous. I was so anxious during the pregnancy, and I'm not condoning drinking during your pregnancy. I didn't drink, but my doctor actually said, you're better off having like half a glass of wine on a Friday than you are being this anxious. She's like, because I couldn't take anything, obviously, for the anxiety. And I'm not condoning drinking while you're pregnant. I just want to make that clear. However, the point was the stress was so high, and we don't talk about it. And you can talk about it with your partner. I would tell my ex-husband, he has no idea. Like, he can't possibly understand what it's like to feel that I'm carrying this child. If something happens to it, it's my fault. Yeah. Like, that is a burden that I don't feel we talk a lot about in pregnancy. We talk about all the positives and, oh, you're carrying a baby and it's so wonderful. And it's like, and it's all of those things. But there's a lot of stress that women carry. Not all women, but a lot of women do carry.
I had one woman tell me she felt like it was the most shameful, dirtiest secret when she miscarried, because she felt nobody understood, because she didn't know anybody else like in her circle who had, and just that the words that she used around just feeling so ostracized and isolated. So, which plays, a huge toll on your mental health.
It does. It does. We didn't tell anyone when we were pregnant. The second time. Yeah. I waited as long as I possibly could.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's something I think that, when we kind of take a look at the, our personal journey, our professional journey, learning to be able to, navigate all of that, but in a way that feels like you've got the right support. You've got the right people in your circle. You're asking for help. You're finding resources or asking people for resources, because it really is quite a journey.
It is. Okay. So speaking of professional, I mean, I think we can't do this show without talking about how it shows up at work, right? Mm-hmm. When you're dealing with mental health issues, what's your journey, or how has mental health played a role for you in that more professional setting?
Yeah. I mean, I spoke about kind of the HR piece. I think in a personal moment, I remember being at the stage in my life where I was wanting to separate from my husband.
Right.
And the type of work that I do right now, working in the fitness and the coaching space, I'm on.
Yeah.
All the time. So whatever is kind of going on in here or here needs to be put off to the side to be able to teach, coach, mentor, guide, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. And that mental health journey became very profound when I moved through the months leading up to having the courage to ask for a separation, have that conversation, of course, sit down with my daughters, take full responsibility that it was my decision, and still be able to get through work. Yeah. Like, there are some days, and I remember having this conversation with somebody not too long ago who was in a similar situation of not happy. No, I need to do something. Even just talking about it, I feel my stomach getting anxious, right? Because you think back to, and there are days where I don't even know how I was able to function.
Wow.
Getting to work and literally being able to lead a class. I have, and so it's amazing what the body can do. but at this end, what we can kind of learn to facade when, you know, you've got outward smiles, but inward screams where you feel like you're dying inside. So that mental health piece became very predominant, and me trying to balance self-care, take care of myself, crying more than I've ever cried in my life because, and you know, we've talked about our journeys as we go through divorce, breaking up the family unit, feeling like the worst piece of shit in the world because of all of that, you know, that whole journey, but then being able to put one foot in front of the other, still got to work, still got to pay my bills, still got to do all of the things. And I don't think I have any magical practices or boundaries that it was just literally having the courage to be able to do that and recognizing that I was doing this for my own journey. Yeah. Being able to embrace the mental health component around it, have the right people in my corner and in my circle, but be able to not see what next week look like or the week after, but, and not even the full day. Yeah. Hour by hour by hour. Is
such a hard time. I mean, we talked about our divorce journeys, and I know that place. I remember going into work, and the pressure is feeling as a single mom, all of a sudden it's like I'm the sole income earner, right? So there's pressure there.
Huge pressure.
I know for me, like I'm always whatever we've talked about, overperforming, overachieving. Like I don't miss a day at work. If I'm sick, it's because I am like literally cannot get out of bed. Yep. Like I'm not the person that takes time off. I'm not wired for that. I'm realizing that's not overly healthy either. So, for me, I think the first time I finally showed up authentically at work, because there's this facade of like, we used to call her Professional Kate. She has a name. So there was Professional Kate. Oh yeah. And Professional Kate is like, she comes up every now and again, but Professional Kate was a persona, right? And then there was my go out, have fun weekend Kate, and they were very different people. Yeah. And right. They're both P's. Look at that. But Professional Kate never showed, any weakness at work. Right. So for me, that was like, I had to be on the ball. Yep. And then when John, my stepdad, died, for the first time ever, I remember, obviously, I didn't go into work the next day, and I took my 3 days, is what you get to mourn the death. You get 3 days off.
Awful.
Yeah. So
just have a moment to be like, what the hell?
Nobody on the planet can take 3 days off work, right? So it's just not feasible. So I took 5 days, and I'm like, okay, I can work. I'll be fine. I went back to work. Maybe I need the distraction. And I went back to work, and I remember sitting there going, someone's like, are you okay? I'm like, no. I remember being like, I gotta go. Yeah. And so I just told my boss, I'm like, I'm out. And she's like, okay, do you know when you're coming back? I'm like, no, I don't. And for the first time ever in my career, I'm like, I need to take care of myself, my mental health. I can't plow through this. I'm actually going to have to like grieve. So I went on short-term disability, and I'm going to use that language. I had such a stigma around short-term disability where I had seen people abuse the system for so long, but it's there for a reason. And I was fortunate enough to work for a company where I was able to take the time I needed to get in a better mental health space so that I could come back to work. But I came back to work different. I came back to work just much more authentically, less professional Kate. Party Kate didn't come to work. Party Kate stayed for a week.
For Friday night.
So for me, that was really, I think, the first moment where I was like, oh, I can show up human.
Well, and it's like giving yourself, I love that story. And I love that you most likely set the example for other people in your workspace that it was okay to give yourself that time and ask, and that the whole place wasn't going to fall and crumble apart just because you weren't there, but that you gave yourself permission to be able to take what you needed and not put a timeline on when do you think you're going to be back? I don't know. Maybe next week, maybe next month. Yeah. Maybe never. Like I'm saying never is, but you don't know that. And so I love that you didn't put those timelines around that, and you were so open around that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I always encourage my team to do that. but until you lead by example, like it's like telling your kids to do something and you do something. They do what you do, not what you say. And it's the same when you're leading a team. So if I'm saying to my team, like, take all the time, like if you're burned out and stressed out, take the time you need, but I'm showing up to work burned out and stressed out, not taking the time I need.
Yep.
They're just going to do likely what you do.
Totally.
And so I agree that like by doing that, it gives permission for others to take the time they need.
Yep. Yep. So
twisting that a little bit, because I touched on this, how some people abuse the system. Do you feel like we have over rotated in some way? And I know this is a bit of a loaded question, but let's talk about it. Like, is there an over rotation to, mental health? There's this amazing, we're all talking about it. It has a lot more awareness, but is there a dark side to that? Like a flip side where, everybody's anxious, everybody's got some sort of mental health concern, right?
And you're right. It's a loaded question, but I think it's a lot more subjective in terms of depending on what perspective you're looking at it.
Yeah.
Coming from the HR space, I have kind of maybe I don't want to say a different view, but I have more of a professional view, kind of having worked in that space. I will say, I feel like it's become a lot easier for people, employees to play the victim card. And I don't say that with any disrespect or any preconceived notions, but especially after COVID, I feel it's a lot easier for people to say, oh, I have anxiety. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't.
Right.
Waking up with a headache and not feeling well.
Right.
Oh, I'm sick. I can't come in. Well, sometimes we have to do hard things when we're not feeling 100%.
Yeah.
I will also say that from a business perspective, like depending on what organization you're working for, it is absolutely up to the business to make sure that they're providing appropriate accommodations. And I would see it all the time. Businesses just like, they're fine. Maybe they're not fine. So what are you going to be doing to be able to support their return to work? What accommodations that they need? Are you having the conversations? If you know that somebody is feeling off, what are you doing to talk about that? Or even more importantly, have you built that trust where they feel comfortable telling you, maybe not in all of the details, but where they feel comfortable with, here's what I need. Yeah. Are you open to that? Are you providing that support? On a personal level, I think it comes down to, so we've talked about having the right circle. We've talked about being able to set boundaries, all that kind of stuff, but it also involves a lot of self-reflection, self-ownership, and self-responsibility. Yeah. I was just having this conversation with somebody earlier this week. Nothing changes if nothing changes. Yeah. So if you're doing the same thing and getting the same results, or you're feeling the same way every day, look at your habits, look at your routines. And as hard as it is sometimes, we need to do ourselves that favor and be able to recognize that while the wound, whatever it is in your life, may not be your fault, likely isn't your fault, whatever the case may be, we always have a choice in how we heal. Yeah. Not making it easy. Yeah. And sometimes that requires medication. Sometimes that requires, all different things because mental health can be so complex. Yeah. But I think it's very subjective. I think you can view it on both sides.
It's tricky. I like that you're coming at it from that HR lens, because I agree, like creating that space for people is so important. Totally. And I so appreciate that we're talking about it more. I do see sometimes with my kids this ability to self-diagnose online through TikTok and Google is an issue, where they're like, oh, I have OCS, right? Like I'm compulsive. I'm like, but you're not. I'm OCD. Sorry, not OCS. And I'm like, okay, just you like a tidy room doesn't make you OCD, right? Like that's a very specific condition. Or they'll be like, oh, I have anxiety. I'm like, well, you don't have anxiety. I'm like, you might feel anxious. We talk about that one a lot in my house, but they're so quick to self-diagnose now. And because they talk so openly about it, it's like every one of their friends, it's like they compete sometimes on the like, who's got the bigger disorder.
I've got that.
Right. And so I worry sometimes for my kids and that generation of, yes, an open conversation is so critical. But do we over rotate sometimes on I'm just feeling an emotion versus it's a mental health concern?
Yep. I love that you brought that up, because especially after COVID, I think that's happening more and more, where we've gravitated so much to, I'm not going to figure out the answers. I'll just check TikTok.
Yeah.
Wow. And it's not funny. I mean, I'm not being
Yeah,
facetious, but it's such a valid point.
Yeah.
Such a valid point. And I worry about that for my daughters as well.
Well, I worry that it becomes a crutch because the concern with it is if someone had diabetes or they have diabetes and they have a condition, they're treating their condition. Does it mean sometimes they're not going to show up for work? Absolutely. But if that becomes the crutch where you can no longer work, or if that becomes the reason you don't do everything, it's harder for you. Yep. And that's the reality. And we all have things that we're working through. And so it's when it becomes a crutch for you to not show up and follow through with your commitments that I worry.
Yeah.
You know, the reasons people don't show up to work now, to me, is like unheard of. Like I would show up and like, I've had an hour and there was just a meme on Facebook about this, but like you'd show up to work, like smelling like cigarette smoke from the bar with a stamp on your hand, and you've slept for an hour, right? And you still show up to work to bag groceries. Yep. And I think now it's like kids are like, oh, I didn't sleep well, I'm not going to work. Like I worry about that. Like how far we potentially
and I think those are valid points. I just was telling one of my daughters the other day, life is hard. You know, she was, you know, sharing a situation that she was struggling with and just, like, I don't know. And I was like, but life is hard. Like you can't pause everything in your life to kind of fix one thing. You need to learn to kind of be able to balance all of the things in a healthy manner. But life is hard, and you're going to have to do hard things in order, you know, and so I said to her, like, if it was easy, everybody would do it. You know, you walk around, you see a lot of people are miserable at work or miserable in their life. And well, it's hard having the conversations to say, I'm not happy in my marriage. It's hard to have the conversations to, you know, to say, this isn't the job for me. So I guess I'm going to go find something else and maybe it'll pay me less. But the long-term gain, those are hard things to do. And I agree, like in terms of that over rotating, a lot of, that generation, how do we find that balance as moms to be able to push them and give them that support? Also have them recognize that, no, you're going to have to do hard things. That's just part of life.
I love my kids in the morning. I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go to work either, but guess what? We're both going. There we go. So, okay, we're busy people. You touched on this too, and you had these conversations with your kids. Not busy at all.
We are busy.
Yeah. How do you then weave and prioritize, you know, mental health, what I call mental health self-care? Like how do you take care of that space, and how do you weave it into your day?
Yeah, I think so. And I've worked on this over the last couple of years. It's redefining productivity, really paying attention to the notion for me that productivity is synonymous with constant busyness. So oftentimes I will ask myself, is this a busy task or a productive task? Like, what am I doing? Am I doing this to satisfy my perfectionism, or am I doing this because, no, this needs to be done? And really learning to include activities that promote my overall well-being. You mentioned it, you know, saying to your girlfriends, like, no, I need to go home because I need to sleep. So recognizing that rest, relaxation, and self-care, learning how to say no, that's been really hard for me. I've worked really hard on that over the last couple of years. And I try to remind myself that our bodies and our minds are just like the batteries on our phone, right?
100%.
You know, we panic and, oh my God, I only have 20% left on my phone. Not that I would ever let my battery go to 20%. I feel like it's kind of like the gas tank thing. Like there's those people that will, oh my God, it's a
run on E. No,
that would be Rob. He's sometimes will coast in on fumes.
That would be Eric.
Okay. Why? Whereas if there's a quarter of gas left, I'm like, no, I have to fill it.
Oh my God.
Little sidebar there. But when was the last time we plugged ourselves in? And finding time for activities that bring me joy and fulfillment. Really and truly joy and fulfillment. I feel like, yes, we're all busy. We all have 24 hours in a day though. And so nobody's going to find that joy and fulfillment except for you. Nobody's going to carve that time out unless you do. So I've had to be really intentional around that.
It's interesting. So I'm going to flip it because I am intentional, but not rigid. So I am not a routine. Like I like my routine. Everyone likes the routine. I'm not good at, no, sorry, it's the wrong language. I can hear Sherry in my head. It doesn't work for me if I try and get super rigid about scheduling my stuff. So what I've learned to embrace is that it's a priority for me, my mental health. So meditation, let's say.
Yes.
I commit to meditating if I don't get to it, I don't get to it. I don't create this like feeling of, and I've said this before in the show, one more thing I'm failing at. I commit to working out a certain number of times a week, and I commit to meditating a certain number of times a week. Where I find pockets to do that now for me is ebb and flow. My schedule's insane between Eric's house, my kids. I'm no longer penciling it in my calendar. I'm no longer blocking it.
I love that.
So for some people, if that works for you, great. I've kind of removed this like need to have it so scheduled. And that's what works for me. I have a girlfriend when she works out physically, like she needs an angle. Like she needs to be doing a 10K. She's like, come do this try with me. And I'm like, that doesn't motivate me. That actually demotivates me. Like it terrifies me to think I have to compete in something. Whereas for her, that drives her. Right.
Yep.
So for me, I need to weave it into part of what I do every single day. And it doesn't feel like a thing I got to tick off. It's like eating.
I love that you mentioned that because there's so many people that feel like if it's not written down, it didn't happen.
Right.
I have to check it off. But I love, oh my gosh, it just makes me so happy to hear you say that though, because just giving people permission that the ebb and the flow. Yeah. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Doesn't mean you're a failure. And we deal a lot as women with those high expectations of, oh, I didn't work out, so I suck. And so now I'm going to eat everything in sight and I guess I'll start again next. No, it's okay if you miss a day.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. I love that share.
Yeah, that's self-care too. I know we're nearing the end of the show. There's so much to talk about. Maybe let's just talk with giving, like give you one piece of encouragement as we're really, I'm just thinking of our listeners who are listening and watching today.
Yeah.
Like what's one key nugget that you would want to leave them with?
Well, I love quotes.
Yeah.
I've used them as anchors kind of, over the years, and even kind of, when I'm, doing the real life with Wendy, I use a lot of quotes to be able to anchor people to whatever it is that they're feeling. Brene Brown has a wonderful one. Vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. Truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they're never ever weaknesses.
No, I love that.
Isn't that beautiful? And, so I think finding quotes, and when I coach people, I'm a big believer in writing things down because visual is memorable. I use a quote when I coach often, even in the fitness space, see the target, hit the target. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be like target as in like a big goal. Yeah. Even if it's a quote that resonates with you where you're using it as your screensaver or something that reminds you. And then looking at your circle, changing your environment to be able to help you with your thoughts, finding those people that cheer for you and lift you up. Yeah,
I love that. I agree. Like you don't have to do it alone. I think women often feel like it's the weight of the shoulder. The weight of the world is on their shoulders and only their shoulders. And it's not. Every woman, I think, feels the same way. And so you don't have to carry the burden of all your anxiety, depression, whatever mental health challenge you have. Find someone to talk to, seek out a therapist, find community. We talk so much about the importance of that on this show, but it doesn't have to be a solo activity.
No,
it doesn't have to be.
No. And I'll even say, even just doing this episode, it makes my heart feel so warm just sharing our journeys together and knowing that people are going to listen to this feeling like, okay, I'm not alone. I can relate.
That's the biggest thing. Okay. So lastly, this is a Living Richly podcast. So in the context of that, how are you maintaining and cherishing your mental health?
I'm always considering myself a work in progress. I use that line often when I'm journaling. I have a right to prioritize me. I have a right to choose where my energy goes. I have a right to choose, what I do with my time, what I want in my space, and recognizing that being a high achiever, and that's, it means I almost have to work even harder at setting boundaries, disconnecting, and remembering that anything and anyone can be replaced. Even in our jobs, right? Like if I left my job, I'd be replaced next week. Yeah. And so keeping that in mind, that the only one in control of what we want is us. Yeah. Someone once said your inbox will always be full even when you're dead. I'm like, right. Thank you for that. Because you are at the end of the day, right? Yeah. I love that. I think, my focus
in the last 2 years has really shifted to, you know, we hear that like health is the new wealth. We're hearing that a lot more. For me, it's I want to live a long time. And part of that is, you know, the physical side has always been there for me, but truly caring for self is really so important. And part of that is caring for my mental health. So prioritizing that, allowing space for the quiet times when I need them and the meditation when I need it. But like that mental self-care is so critical to longevity.
I love that.
For me. So that's a big one. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Awesome.
What a phenomenal episode. We encourage you to, if this resonated in any way with you, like, share, and subscribe. Help us get the word out. Sharing is caring. Visit our website at livingritually.me to find out how to join our private Facebook group. Gosh, I love that Facebook group. I know we say it all the time, but it has just been absolutely amazing seeing people come out of their shell, share their journey, share their story, and the people that have been able to connect and meet each other on similar journeys have been absolutely wonderful. Don't forget that we've got the 15-day life vision challenge.
So hard to say, but so meaningful.
15-day life vision challenge. This is live on the website right now. Did we mention it's free? It is free. It is a wonderful tool that helps you get incredibly clear on what truly matters to you and helps you paint the vision for your life. Did we mention it's free? It is free. It is wonderful.
It is.
The feedback in the comments have been absolutely phenomenal with people breaking through, being able to link arms with like-minded people on the same journey. So don't forget to give us a like, share, add in your comments, help get the word out. And until next time, continue living your best life.